And batting cleanup is Simon Rosenberg. Again, Simon, president of NDN, founder of NDN, and founder of New Politics Institute. He's also been involved in presidential politics since the war room days of '92. And so Simon is going to give the closer here, and then we'll open up to discussion. Simon?
Pete, thank you. Andres, welcome. This is Andres' I think, 10th day at NDN, so we sort of threw him in and see if he could swim, and I think he did all right today. And Joe for being with us. There's so much to talk about. I mean, this has been such an exciting season, and so much is going on that I just have four things that I want to talk about today. One is the collapse of conservatism. Second is how the nation's people are changing so much. Third is how the economy is going to be a major issue in '08. And fourth is what I call the virtuous cycle of participation that we're seeing in American politics today. And all of these things, I think, are new and different from what we've seen before. So for those of us who track elections, I think there really are. I do think, and I agree with Pete's premise, and obviously we wrote this in an article that you can find on ndn.org, is that I do think we're in a new era of politics. I think we're seeing the emergence of a new governing agenda that speaks to 21st century challenges and not 20th. We are seeing the emergence of new media, new tools, technology tools that are fundamentally changing the way we communicate and advocate. And third is the people of the United States are changing at such a rapid rate that all of this together is birthing a new politics. But the key also, particularly for people who've been tracking politics in Washington, is the other great change is that conservatism, which really was the ascendant governing philosophy in America, and their partner, the Republican Party, the ascendant political party in America, has utterly collapsed, right? We've seen a political, intellectual, philosophical collapse of the conservative movement that I think is on the scale of what happened with Herbert Hoover in the 1920s. And if you think about what John McCain is now walking into as the standard bearer for his party, we are able to say with a straight face that he's going to be defending the worst foreign policy mistake in the history of the United States. He's going to be defending an economy that has allowed average people now to be making less money today than when George Bush took office, before we even began to head into what will either be a slowdown or a Bush recession. That you've seen their party sacrifice core civil liberties that have made our country different and better than so many other countries in the rest of the world, and we've seen historic levels of debt and recklessness in foreign policy around the world. That I think that this era of Republican governance, where Americans were able to experience conservative governance unfettered, right, is something that, and who rejected it outright in 2006, and as Amy has pointed out, that you've seen this dramatic shift in party ID, you've seen dramatic shift in congressional generic head-to-heads and the presidential generic head-to-heads, that for those of people who've been following politics, we are entering a period where the Republican Party and conservative movement has not been weaker, and the Democratic Party and the progressive movement have not been stronger really in my entire adult lifetime. And that is a fundamental transformation, I think, of the way you have to look at politics, because there is always this assumption, as Amy pointed out, that somehow this Republican machine and these Republican attacks are going to be triumphant. I think that whoever the Democratic nominee is, they're going to be facing, I think, an extraordinarily weak Republican Party conservative movement. And I think, and I can talk more in Q&A about this, I think John McCain was the single worst candidate they possibly could have put up in 2008, which I'd be happy to expand upon more. Second is that I think we've, on demography, I think we're going through the most profound transformation of our people in the history of this country, right? Since Europeans started coming here in the 16th century, that we are, when I was born, the country was 89% white, 10.5% African American, 0.5% other. Today we're 66% white, 33% minority, and we will be majority minority in my lifetime. And so what it means is that if you are a person just walking around the United States and looking at the people that are on the street that you're walking down, when I was born, only 1 out of 11 or 1 out of 9, right, were minority. Today it's 1 out of 3. And that we are entering a completely different era of racial politics in America, and we're coming out of what we call the end of the Southern strategy of American politics, where some of the racism that was used by the Republicans to achieve power starting in the 1960s, that those racial attacks are no longer going to have the potency that they had through most of the last 40 to 50 years of politics, because our country is much more minority and we have simply become much more tolerant of otherness, right? This is a core characteristic, I think, of America as we enter the 21st century, is that there is going to be greater intolerance of intolerance. And I think it's in their party, if you want to speak to any core value of the modern conservative movement, is that they are the epitome of intolerant behavior towards otherness, right? It is an all-white party, all-white male party in an age where, you know, we now have the electorate is going to be one-third minority, one-third woman, one-third, white male, one-third minority, one-third white woman, one-third white male. And they are embracing that one-third white male as hard as they can. Two-thirds of the rest of the country is everybody else. And certainly when you look at the Democratic field in 2008, it certainly looked like the America of the 21st century. Theirs looked like the party of Leave It to Beaver in the 1950s America. And it is ironic that John McCain is playing Johnny Be Good as his theme song. It fits this party that looks like a black and white party of 1950s America. Third is that the economy, I think, is going to be a major factor in a way that it wasn't in 2000, 2004, for the simple reason that we are entering also a different age of how globalization is playing out, something that elites, I think, have had a very hard time actually coming to grips with, which is why I think this debate is only really just beginning, is that in an era where we had high GDP growth, high productivity growth, the stock market at historic highs, high corporate profits, right, by any historical measure, and great success at the corporate level in the United States, and where the upper third of the American population really soared in their income and their assets, that we've actually had people are making less money today than when George Bush came into office. The typical family's income has dropped in a period of extraordinary, robust economic growth. This has never happened in the history of the United States. We are in unprecedented, uncharted economic waters, and that the party that figures out how to speak effectively to the struggle of the middle class today, which is really driving so much of American politics, will succeed. It means that security will not have the potency that it had in 2004, 2002, 2000, in the last few elections, and that really one of the defining issues of this race, and you started to see it play out last night in Wisconsin, is going to be who's got an economic strategy for America that makes globalization works for all Americans. I'm not convinced either party has figured this out, but I think it's certainly going to rebalance the weight of economics and security as we head into '08, and I think it's going to play very bad for the Republicans who've been have been architects of this economic decline of the middle class in the United States. And then finally is that I think, as Joe talked about, we have entered a period that is really just so remarkable and I think uplifting, and a period where we should all be very proud that when the American people have been called, when they've been given new tools, when people have asked them to participate in their politics and in the future of their country, they are doing so in unprecedented levels in our history, right? We are seeing an explosion of citizen involvement in our politics, whether it's through money or volunteerism or citizen participation in the voting that's taken place. And I think what we're seeing is a renewal of our democracy in our country. I think it is a citizen-led renewal of our democracy. I think that, as Joe talked about, I think what's driving this is not just, and you hear the media sort of groping in this sort of inchoate way to figure out why it is that twice as many people are voting Democrat than Republican, unprecedented kind of stats. We've seen Barack Obama, right, winning more votes in Virginia than all the Republicans combined. I mean, these are extraordinary things that are seen to be unprecedented, and I think what's happening is, because of Joe Trippi and Howard Dean's extraordinary leadership in 2003, they have invented a type of politics where it's made it clear that people now have a meaningful role to play in the future of the country. It's a people-based organizational model that was pioneered by Joe in 2003, has been taken to a different level by Barack Obama. But the core message coming out of the Democratic Party today is that we want people, that they want people involved in a meaningful way in their politics, and people are responding. And I think that it should be incredibly exciting for all of us as Americans, forgetting about which party you're in. The thing that's extraordinary, as Joe mentioned, is the Republicans have not adopted this new model of political organization, this 21st century, people-based, bottom-up organization. They're at least one presidential cycle behind. And I think the way to think about it is like the difference between using conventional weapons and nuclear weapons. They are simply not in the game on this modernization of politics that could leave them at an extraordinary disadvantage in 2008. And so to close, I just want to add this one other thing, and I've written about this quite a bit on our blog, is that because the Democrats now have become so much identified as the party of the people, because there's huge, massive citizen involvement in politics and voting in unprecedented ways, it is impossible for me to imagine that the nominee of the Democratic Party in 2008 will be not picked by the people, but will be picked through a smoke-filled room process. It is simply unimaginable for me, given what has happened this year, that a backroom deal, a group of superdelegates will overwhelm the extraordinary affirmation of the voters who have come out in unprecedented numbers to reverse the direction of where the pledged delegates are headed in the Democratic Party right now. And I think all efforts by one of the major campaigns to insinuate that it could be otherwise, I think is one of the most extraordinary misreads of where modern politics is today, to sort of reaffirm what Joe is saying, because this is now, if we can't affirm and invite and encourage the American people, right, to take back their politics, to view it as something intimate and positive and powerful as opposed to something distant and far away and not connected to themselves, if we don't understand this historic moment where the American people really are rising up to build a future for themselves that they can be proud of and that their kids can be proud of, shame on us, right, as a group of leaders in this country. So I think this fight over how the nomination is going to get settled is enormously important for the future of the party of the people and not the party of the smoke-filled room. So thank you very much, everybody.